Welcome to Drop the Act, the podcast brought to you by Performing Perfectly. I'm Chris Key, I'm your host, and this is episode 3. Gosh, they're flying by, aren't they? And today's guest is broadcaster Mark Clemmit, widely known as Clem. Thanks for joining us. Now, here at Performing Perfectly, we develop programs and courses which are meticulously designed to help enhance communication, presentation, and peak performance skills. So, if you're someone who finds it a little daunting to stand up and speak in front of an audience, then these are the sort of courses for you. But one person who has made a career out of doing exactly that is our next guest, Mark Clemmit. Mark is a sports journalist and presenter who has had an extensive career across radio and television. You may have heard him on BBC Radio 5 Live, or seen him on Football Focus, or even confronting rogue tradesmen on How Safe Is Your House? On Radio 5 Live Sport, he's often commenting on the teams in the lower levels of the Football League and championing the underdog, which, as a Middlesbrough fan, he finds himself doing quite frequently. Now, I've known Mark for over 10 years, and it seemed apt for him to be the first person that I actually sat down and spoke to, and this happened during the summer of last year. He was around when Performing Perfectly began, and as someone who has made a career out of presentation and performance, I thought it'd be really interesting to hear what he has to say about his style, his tips, and his techniques. So I hope you enjoy the conversation. Now, as always, can I do that thing where I ask you to subscribe and like, and just let us know, give us some feedback on whether you're enjoying the podcast. Now, let's see if Mark Clemmit can drop the act and take us into some of his hidden secrets in the world of presentation. Welcome, Mark Clemmit, or if you don't mind, I'm going to call you Clem because that's how I've known you for the last 10 years. Great to see you again.
And you too. And you had to get the Middlesbrough almost jibe in there, didn't you?
I know, but as a West Brom fan, I felt like I could, although, we'll see. It's going to be hard for us to go up this year, but as a fellow supporter of a championship club, I felt I had the right to have a little dig. So
no, but here's the thing. On the other hand, I think once you reach the riches of the greatest football league in the world, it does get swathed in what I call layers of fat, that there's so much of a cottage industry of people in and around, whereas football below brings real soul and real stories, which kind of fits into what we're talking about today.
It certainly does. It certainly does. It's slightly intimidating because you're my first guest on the podcast. And as a seasoned broadcaster, that does make me a little nervous, but it also feels very apt because I think it was 10 years ago, maybe 2013, when we first met. And that was really at the beginning of Performing Perfectly, when we met at the Football Association. And I did a little keynote there, and then we did a workshop. And then I was on stage with yourself and Nigel Atkins, and we were talking about elite performance and the comparisons between sport and theatre. And that since has evolved into business. And I know we'll get onto elite performance and high performance and all aspects of that a little bit later. But I'd love to start with a little bit about you and your journey to where you are now. And when I was doing my research, the first bit that got me was the word fashion, running your own fashion business. That was one thing I didn't know, that's what you were doing before this started. So take me back there, first of all, Clem.
What are you saying? You're suggesting that a man of my choice of clothing could not possibly work in that industry?
I'd just love to know what you were selling, what the fashions of the day were in Clem's store.
Listen, let's establish straight away, I'm a very old man. So my working career goes back to the mid 1980s. And I'll tell you exactly what happened. My ex-wife was a student at uni at the time. There was a big trend of 1950s fashions doing the round. The vintage stores were really coming into their own. A lot of those vintage stores would buy stuff in from the US, and they'd knock out a second-hand overcoat for, I don't know, a tenner back then, 15 quid or whatever it was. But my ex-wife started to go around jumble sales and pick stuff up, and she'd be buying these overcoats for like 5p, 10p or something like that. And I was at a bit of a loose end at the time. I wanted to be a footballer first and foremost at school. Didn't work out, wasn't good enough. Wanted to be a pop star, had little dalliances, but didn't sort of get it fully off the ground there. And I was at a bit of a loose end, and I thought, there could be a little business here. So I started to go with her to these jumble sales, buy up bits and pieces with a little slush fund of petty cash, and then I'd have them laundered, fixed, sometimes myself, stitching pocket holes up and stuff like that. Started a little market stall, got a sort of more permanent stall that turned into a shop, and that was my sort of introduction to the clothing industry, which then morphed into doing my own wholesale stuff. So I started manufacturing it and made lots of, I guess, street clothes. So that might have been tie-dye batik stuff. It might have been some quite raunchy, sexy dresses. We had quite a classic little black dress label as well. And the business grew quite quickly. But then what happened was, I don't tell this story very often. 1992, I was really heavily overgeared. I'd bought quite a big warehouse. I got absolutely battered for bad debts. Two people took me for five-figure sums. The previous year, the business had been Barclays Bank's small business featured in their published annual accounts. So the growth was absolutely rapid, but got battered for bad debts. Interest rates went through the roof. And then eventually, over 2 or 3 years, I had to shrivel up the business, start working from home. In hindsight, I was probably a little bit depressed and sullen and hiding away. And football, which had been my love right back at the start, came back to me. I started to go socially, built up a bit of camaraderie. As a Middlesbrough fan, we had a famous year in 1997. We reached both cup finals and lost them and got relegated all in the same season. And
I
then
remember it well.
Yeah, awful, awful. Took me a year in neurolinguistic programming to come out of it. And then what happened was back of a car on the way back from a game at Sheffield United. We had a Colombian striker called Hamilton Ricard who didn't get a single shot on target, but he hit all 2,000 of us in the away end. We all came away with black eyes and bruises. And I just happened to say to somebody in the back of the car on the way home, wouldn't it be great if there was a Middlesbrough sort of fans program on the radio? Somebody said yes. For the next 2 months, we worked on a little format of what would be like a podcast now, but podcasts didn't exist by then. We recorded a prototype of it around my dining room table. We ran off 2 cassettes. Ask your grandparents, younger listeners, what they are. And we sent one into the local BBC, one into the local commercial station. The BBC rang us within a week, asked us to come in, gave us a 5-week trial of this program, which was called Red Balls on Fire, on 30 quid each. At the end of that 5 weeks, or the first month of the football season, they said, we'd like you to say at the end of the season, please put our money up to 50 quid each. And within 9 months, it was a very quirky program, fans talking about their beloved team. We'd been nominated for a Sony Radio Award. There we are at the Grosvenor House Hotel in London with 1,000 other people from the radio industry up against Radio 4, 5 Live, TalkSport, etc., etc. And we're nominated for the Sports Award. And everything that has happened to me over the last 2 and a bit decades has been a follow-on from that.
I mean, it's a remarkable rise to fame, as it were. The switch from business and what sounds like you were quite the entrepreneur at that point to suddenly being behind a microphone and communicating and speaking to an audience. I mean, is that something you naturally had anyway as a bit of a gift, or how did you hone your craft when it came to communication?
Do you know what? Did I have that as, I mean, you obviously have it as an entrepreneur, but then when you've had one of those life challenges, like losing a business, and I just had a daughter at the time, and I'd got guarantees on the house for the funding that was owed and things. So in hindsight, the biggest leap is probably from starting the business again in my garage, almost ignoring neighbors, not making eye contact. In hindsight, I was probably a little bit depressed. I don't say that often in my lifetime. I've been very lucky from that point of view, but that was obviously a big leap. Chris, it's an enormous thing. And I think this is one of the fallacies about people that do speak for a living, that we're all impervious to nerves and anxiety and worries. I'm telling you now, I've worked with some people that are household names. I've worked with sports stars that are transitioning into punditry. We all still have that little chatterbox on our shoulders going, you're going to fail, you're going to say something silly, you're going to get caught out. It's still there now. And even having done, I don't know what, must be 1,000 films for the BBC, little feature films on people. Even having done nearly a decade on a live results show, which is carnage, that you're starting a sentence and somebody's telling you to go in a different direction literally before you've finished the sentence. It never really goes away. I never used to sleep easily on a Friday night when I knew I had the live show coming. It would still be there, niggling away at me, and there would nothing like getting the first 30 seconds away. I guess a bit like your industry, where probably you like to get that first note out and for it to be in tune and soar off and get into the first chorus, and then you start to relax and off you go. So it's a huge leap. It's a huge leap, Chris.
And as you've touched on that in a way, I was going to speak to you about sort of imposter syndrome. You know, you have interviewed many or facilitated conversations with many high profile people within both sports and business. What were your sort of coping mechanisms when you were sort of starting out and finding yourself very quickly in a situation where you were maybe interviewing people or speaking to an audience of a certain size and thinking, goodness me, you know, how am I here? How do I cope with this?
Well, that's really interesting, because never in anything that I've done, and obviously I've done lots of broadcasts for 25 years nationally for the majority of that. I've hosted some huge events right up to 40, 50,000 people in a big sports stadium. I've been all over the world and done this kind of stuff, but I don't think I really think in terms of the audience en masse. I might have been silly enough in the early days to focus on somebody with a bored looking face in the front row and allow that to undermine me a little bit. But how did I cope? Do you know what? The first 6 months of doing the magazine program, the sort of podcast style program on the borough, yeah, it was taught. I used to stand outside that BBC local radio studio. We used to pre-record it on a Thursday night, would record it long as well, so it had to be edited down to fit the time slot. So there was no pressure of live, and I would give myself a pep talk, and I would be standing there going, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And I guess the lesson from that is sometimes we've got to act as if and push ourselves through. I'm motivated by not feeling long-term pain. So I always will sacrifice the sort of short-term fulfillment. If I want to lose weight, I'll let the chocolate bar go because I don't want to feel sludgy about myself that I didn't achieve the objective of losing a pound that week. So not feeling long-term pain has always motivated me. And I say to anybody out there who hates public speaking, and obviously in surveys, it comes out as our number one fear, more even than dying. So if you at your average funeral, technically more people would rather be in the casket waiting to be buried or cremated than delivering the eulogy on that basis. I always say to people, you got to push through. Don't miss opportunities because of this, because it is possible to counter it. But you know what happens, Chris, is over time, you learn to create your own comfort zone. And I know what mine is. I'm in the middle of awards season right now. I've probably got at least one sports orientated awards a week over a 6-week period. And it's all in the prep for me. And if I am prepped and I've got a thorough brief from the client, an initial document for the client, and know who I'm talking to about what, and I have checked, double checked, triple checked that script, made sure that I've highlighted where the videos are coming in, what my cue to the videos is. Once I've done that, I do not remotely get nervous about it anymore. I'll get out of bed and I'll go, all right, what am I doing today? And I'm up and I'm off. But I've been doing it for 2+ decades, and I just know that floats my boat. I like to wear my nice clothes, but my perception of nice clothes before you say anything. It's not the time to put a new shirt on where the collar's too tight or a pair of shoes you don't like or anything like that. That's my comfort zone. That's what I like doing. And I know you concentrate on breathing with your business. I do my mindfulness. I have my little app and I do my 10-15 minutes every morning. And once I've done that, I've chilled myself out. I'm up and I'm off, and that's my comfort zone. And that allows me to be pretty relaxed and I hope pretty authentic.
I think it's it is all in the preparation, and that's something we try and communicate with the people we work with. Coming from a theatre background, I always make the comparison that there's no way that we would rehearse a show, learn our lines, but then never say them out loud, never practice them, just look at this script and think, oh yeah, I know it. We need to get up on our feet and we need to do. So just you saying that, the idea of the more prepared you are, the more it takes away, I suppose, from that internal fear of dread or the nerves that could possibly arise.
I suppose it depends on the situation, and that is me. And if I think back to an event I did a couple of weeks ago with two broadcasting legends, Jeff Stelling and Chris Kamara, and they could not be more different. I mean, Jeff Stelling, for those that are not football orientated listening to this, was the absolute master of Saturday afternoon's results. I mean, he would be across a 6-hour program where there was all sorts happening, have a fact on anything. You know what, Chris? He used to do 2 days prep. He would lock himself away all day Thursday, all day Friday in order to be prepared, in order to have that information around him on the off chance that it would be used, because sometimes a lot of stuff would just be held over because maybe the person or the team didn't activate whatever stat he wanted to get away. So that's Stelling's persona. Cammy, on the other hand, I've never known a man so relaxed in his own skin who is willing to throw himself into absolutely anything. So it could be people are listening to this for whom preparation is not their comfort zone, but I suspect the vast majority of people out there, particularly those who don't feel competent of speaking in public, a lot of their agitation and anxiety is caused because they don't prep and they leave it too late, and they're there ready to do the wedding speech on a Saturday lunchtime, and they haven't even thought about what they're going to say on the Friday night. Well, for me, the reason you're nervous is because you haven't done the hard job. By Friday night, the week leading up to any wedding, you should be practicing it and making sure you nail the sort of key syllables and where to pause and stuff, and not still rummaging around thinking, what am I going to say?
So you mentioned comfort zone, and there's something we discuss often about stepping out of your comfort zone and not being afraid to step out of your comfort zone, because often it also informs you of what you're capable of, And I don't want to go into too much detail about what we do on our course, but I know you've witnessed it firsthand with some of the coaches at St. George's Park. But have there been moments where you have really had to step out of your comfort zone, and that has sort of shaped the direction that you want to go in, where you've looked at, okay, I'm comfortable there, but this not so much? Or once you'd stepped out of your comfort zone in certain situations, you then felt moving forward you were more capable of taking on that particular role, whatever it may be?
Yeah, well, I think probably, I mean, you obviously are. You're giant leap orientated. I think you're helping people come out of their shell. My own approach is a little bit more technical, based on what I call pracademia. So it's all the things I've learned over the years about how to sit straight and support the respiratory system, or a good firm stance if you're feeling a little bit nervous along the way there. There are various ways to do this. But when I started to do this coaching, it was a little germ of an idea, maybe a client from a conference I'd hosted or something said, oh, have you ever thought, you're a good public speaker, have you ever thought of passing this on? I mean, honestly, I think when I first stood, particularly groups, I mean, one-on-ones quite easy, because actually I'm quite good at asking questions. And so a good coach helps a client get from where they are now to where they want to be through the art of questioning and a little bit of guidance and mentoring. But once you start standing in front of a group and experimenting, yeah, it's a huge leap, and the chatterbox is back, and you're worried about it. And in fact, one of the first ones actually, I'm going to be careful not to name names, but I remember going to do a big old one of these where I'd be told, oh, you'll have 15 people in the room maximum. I get to Old Trafford football ground, and there's about 35 people in the room, and 2 or 3 of them were absolute legends of the game. I mean, Chris, I was absolutely ricking it. So yeah, for defo, whereas now I've learned to simplify my slides, I've learned to make sure that I like the backup of having a little when I say script, I'm not reading every word, but I just, there's a lot of information to disseminate and dissect and share. So, sometimes I've just got the Word doc on my iPad and I'll flick through and make sure I haven't missed anything crucial out. And I found my own mode. And now in the main, I don't get nervous about those things. Actually, I've got one quite recently. So, QPR Football Club asked me to go in to do some media training. And I said, I tell you what, why don't you go and sell it to the squad? We'll give you half an hour to explain what it is you want to do, and then if any of them want one-to-ones with you, they can. Oh, those players these days at those ages, it's tumbleweed. You get nothing back. I've had this conversation with a lot of football managers at Mace. You get nothing. And I launch one of my big icebreaker gags, and there's just completely straight faces. And so that even recently, that was in the last 6 months, that was a little addition to what I was doing. I don't think I've had to address a squad of young footballers before. Yeah, that was a leap. But
and it's then managing that internal dialogue, isn't it? I mean, I've been there myself. I did the same thing very recently, doing a bit of a keynote, and you mentioned it earlier, that just catching one person's face, and this person whose face I caught was a big name.
Yeah.
And immediately, as soon as I saw that face, I was like, in my head, oh, he hates it. He doesn't like what I'm saying, and just trying to quieten down that voice and take control and let that go and trust in your preparation and trust in what you know, most importantly.
Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, you've been in your industry a long time. The business that we're now talking about and performing perfectly has been around for a good decade and a bit now. If you're getting bookings and I'm getting bookings, I'm going to work on the basis that all these different organizations that book us are not stupid. They're not doing it to get us out of the house. We must have a reasonable reputation, and I get a lot of repeat business from the same organization. So I'm going to work on the assumption that they're there. But one of the very worst things, in my opinion, you can do is focus on one individual. Can I tell you a story of something that happened to me? This is absolutely rare. So I'm hosting a mental health conference for our Professional Footballers Association. And this was several years ago. And my sort of keynote chat at the end of the day was with Frank Bruno, obviously, former British heavyweight champion. And to say that some of Frank's language was a little bit of decades previous in terms of how we describe mental health conditions is an understatement. And I'm sitting there as the moderator, and I've got about 150 people in the room, and I'm thinking, now, it's a real life experience. That's how it was for him, describing how it was back in the day. Do I take the former heavyweight champion of Britain to task over this, or do I let this go because it is that real life experience? And I looked at one person in the very front row, and his eyes were boring into me. He was giving me absolute resting bitch face, and I got really intimidated by it. But I just had to push through and let it go. And at the end of this, I'd let Frank get away with all this stuff on the basis I've just said. And I said, ladies and gentlemen, Frank Bruno. And the room applauded. And we were going to a break. And this person stood up and walked towards me. I thought, oh my gosh, now I'm going to get it. He went, that was a masterclass. How you handled that and the situation was absolutely a sight to behold. Wonderful to hear. I just want to congratulate you on it. How did that? We all try and pride ourselves on the importance of body language, 55% of the communication process and all that. But sometimes people's demeanor does not match what they're really feeling. Often it does, but sometimes it doesn't. And if you are speaking in public, you cannot afford to concentrate on one individual. You have to concentrate on the other 99% of your audience that are in the room and are probably feeling warm and fuzzy about you.
Yeah, certainly those non-verbal clues are the giveaways. But so with us, we're always talking about being aware of what you're giving away in your body language. And obviously in that situation with you, that person wasn't, but not that it was important that he did. But listen, let's just jump back a bit to the beginning again, back to Red Balls of Fire, and then the journey into journalism, and whether it was 5 Live next or what came next, and just your style. I mean, you're very easy to listen to. You're a great communicator, and I know myself, being a football fan, I've seen you many times on Final Score or whatever it may be, or hearing you on Radio 5 Live. It's a distinctive style you have. How much of that was a choice? How much is that just you, or did you, when you started out, did you think about actually how you were going to present yourself, what your style would be, what your performance in a way would be?
We've sat and had a drink together before, haven't we? We've sat and had dinner together. Am I any different off air than I am on air?
You're not at all. And
authenticity, then, I guess, is the key. The truth is, you're searching for your place in the world at the start there. I suppose the one advantage that I had, and I have always been completely and totally self-employed freelance. Still to this day, I'm a constant hustler, constantly using those entrepreneurial skills from the business days. If I get the slightest hint that you're hosting a conference and there might be an opportunity, I'll be getting your number and ringing you and saying, have you thought of doing X or Y or Z? If you give me the slightest hint that you enjoyed something I did and you might want some guidance on your public speaking, I'll be doing that. I guess the difference when you do that is that if you're an employee, say, of the BBC, in order to earn my salary, I would have had to do a lot of pretty, what in my eyes, no offense to anybody, but would be mundane shift. I'd have probably had to read sports bulletins. I'd have probably had to do some fairly, in my eyes, run-of-the-mill stuff, because they wouldn't have been able to justify me just doing the more flowery stuff, or the sort of stuff that I have done. So I guess that makes a little bit of difference. So I took that risk of being freelance. I remember the sort of second clothing business that I built started to run down. There was a risk period where I just went for it on the broadcast side and was simply not getting the financial remuneration. So I'm already in a sticky hole financially, but I just felt that calling of broadcast. But I think in the main, I had some sticky stuff back at the very start. I know I was being a bit sing-song with my vocal delivery, and a couple of senior people at the BBC who've gone on to be even more senior within the Beeb pulled me and said, what's that all about? And tried to coach me a little bit about that. And then I kind of just relaxed into it. And once you start doing it on a regular basis, that's when your house style starts to develop. And I suppose the big change for me was about 20 years ago, I did a thing called the 92 Club for BBC Radio 5 Live, where I visited all 92 top 4 division football clubs in the country in one season. I watched a game and I would gather interviews, and then we'd do a sort of a wrap up of it all on a Monday night on 5 Live. And once you're doing 3 games a week and meeting half a dozen people and gathering all this material, you quickly learn that you can't be as fastidious and quite as scripted, because there simply isn't time to do that. And so you start to relax into it and stuff starts to work, and then you get a little bit of a reputation for it. But I always keep reminding myself as well that sport is an entertainment industry, and there's a lot of pomposity, and for me it's got far too technical. I'm not I've never been one of these people that wants to go into too much detail. Show me the incident, get the expert to tell me why it's wrong. That'll do me. I don't need 6 runs of it as to, we'll see it from this angle and now we'll do this and look at what's happening with the pigeon in the far corner and the way the ball bounces off its beak. I don't need any of that stuff personally. So I always tried to bring the joy out. And also, and this is one of my number one tips, if you do want a few along the way here.
Certainly.
I have a duty as a broadcaster. I'm not a brilliant keynote speaker. If I was to stand up in front of the audience, I don't have anything prepared like that. Do you know what? I'm quite good at helping people tell their stories. In fact, that's effectively all I do. I do it as a broadcaster. I do it as an event host. I do it as a presentation skills coach. I'm helping people to tell their stories. And in doing that, the word energy comes up with me. I seem to have this level of energy. And that means that you can lift your interviewee, lift a crowd that you're in front of, lift a group of people in a masterclass, and very quickly help put them at ease. We are all constantly transmitting. And there is an emotional contagion attached to that. We choose the imprint that we leave behind. We're having a bad day, somebody's cut us up on the road, we're worried about financial issues, we've got an ailing parent who's got a big scan that day, whatever it is. These are all the life hurdles that we all have to get around. But you choose when you encounter somebody, whether it's for 15 seconds or for 3 hours, the impression of that is going to be taken away. That imprint is your responsibility, no more. You could have a bad meeting with somebody in one room and it could end up in screaming and shouting. You go into the room next door with a complete stranger. You decide whether you're carrying that atmosphere and aura with you. So we're all constantly transmitting. We're all constantly leaving our imprint. We are energy engineers for ourselves and everybody all around us. We should never, ever forget that. I think it is an absolute fundamental of communication. I don't know what you think, Chris.
Well, I agree. I mean, it reminds me of, we work with a guy called Brendan McGurgan, and he's a business entrepreneur. And I remember him saying once that the most precious gift we can give someone is time. The time to listen, to time to be there for them. And you've just mentioned energy, and I'd also add passion to that. You are so passionate about what it is that you do and what you're talking about, and that passion comes across. And for me, when you're communicating, and certainly when I have to communicate on a show like Les Miserables, when I'm standing in front of a cast for the first time and I need them to be as passionate about this production as I am, then if it doesn't come across through my delivery, then how can I expect them to feel it themselves? So I think you've hit the nail on the head there.
Yeah, and listen, you're absolutely right about that, because if you're not passionate about the subject that you're talking about, then we're all governed by self-interest. What is in it for the people that you're talking to? And if you can't sell that, whether it's a product, a service, yourself, an opportunity, a cause, if you can't sell that with passion, people get caught up with, am I going to be funny or not? Am I going to get caught out technically? The number one skill is to, as you say, is to sell stuff with absolute passion. And actually, I think this might be a good time to introduce that notion of technical v soft skills, because technical skills, of course, if you want to be an accountant or an engineer or whatever it is, you need the technical skills to get in the door. But probably how far you go will be governed by those soft skills, by the passion that Chris is talking about. Your technical skills will only get you so far. Of course, there'll be 3 or 4% of the world's population that are of genius standards, where they don't need to worry about how they're impacting other people because their technical prowess is so strong that they are a savant, a genius in that particular field. But for the vast majority of us, and I say this, I work with a lot of sort of postgraduate students, and I say this to them, that your technical skills, your qualification will get you in the door, but how far you go will be governed by attitude, which involves passion, energy, enthusiasm, willingness to get your hands dirty, willingness to get into situations, opening your eyes, having conversations, deciding whether you're going to walk down a corridor with your headphones in looking down, or whether you're going to be bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, say good morning, and you never know where that conversation's going to lead.
And just going back to where we started with this, just about your style and your delivery, was it something you listened back to? Did you find yourself going back over previous broadcasts and going, does this work? What's my pace like? What's my pitch like? What's my pause like? What's my energy like? Or did you just trust that the response you were getting either on the street or from people like the BBC was enough to tell you were doing the right things?
I'm probably breaking all the rules here.
There's no rules.
I have not listened back to anything I've done on the radio for many, many years. Very rarely live television stuff, particularly at length. Maybe if it was a one-off and it felt crisp and I was looking for something for my show reel. I'll watch back the films that I make, because there's a process there involved in setting it up, filming it, somebody's taken it away and edited it. But yeah, not so much. That's bad, isn't it? Because I often advise people, one of the initial stages, if you want to, is to get your camera phone, get a little tripod, film yourself talking about whatever it is in front of you, describing this roll of sellotape I happen to have in front of me on the table. This is a roll of sellotape and it's got a hole in the middle and it's really good for fixing things to the wall. It's got quite a nice yellow hue. And then watch yourself back without the sound on, so you can see whether you come across as warm and friendly or whether you've got a very serious looking face. Put this audio back up. Don't look at the pictures. Just listen to your voice. But here I am. I tell people that one all the time. I've just shared it with you and anybody that's listening, but I don't necessarily practice what I preach. Is that wrong? Should I watch myself occasionally?
Well, I mean, we will always encourage people to be aware of how they appear, exactly as you just said. So whether they're hopping from foot to foot while they're speaking, and
Yes.
certainly what the
Yeah.
sound of the voice is doing, and what the speed and pace and pitch
Yeah.
is doing. But
Yeah.
what about when you shifted from radio to television for the first time? Because that would have been a completely new medium for you, and I don't know, but maybe very quick learning was needed in that situation.
I do remember. Yeah, I used to watch stuff. And I said I was very old. The collagen has long since gone in my eyelids. And I remember watching at first, and I used to squint a bit and not properly open my eyes. So I do remember being conscious of that I just looked like a baggy frog with these full eyelids that was constantly closed. I do remember sort of consciously doing that. And I don't think about that bit anymore. I mean, yeah, you'd learn that that's probably back in the very early days of television, because I kind of progressed. So from local radio, then there was a little bit of interest in cable television in my hometown, and then that spread to sort of regional television, and that spread to networks. So I can remember having a bit of playtime with a camera person back then, sort of saying, are you just sitting around? Will you take me out on the camera? I just want to play about. So I did a little bit of that. If you can start small in some of those backwaters and then build up, well, I think we're in an air miles industry, Chris, aren't we? The more you do it, the more comfortable you become at it. You learn the bits that work, that don't work for you. And I find myself as well that often it's a repeat process. That's something I might have done for an audience of 500. I do 10 years later for an audience of 5,000. It is a repeat industry, and the more you do it, the better that it kind of gets. You've made me this is good. You made me examine whether I should, but then I'm too busy because, you catch me off the back of an awards ceremony last night, which meant I got home about 2 o'clock in the morning, but I've got 3 things I've got to do this afternoon before I'm out the door to go and coach somebody 1-to-1 tomorrow morning. So yeah, because energy management is very important as well, learning the older that I get, not to start going in noisy environments the night before a big gig, because it affects the tonality of my voice and the quality of my voice and the importance of sleep, etc., etc. So, there's only so much time in the world and only so much we can do. And I suppose continuing to do the work that's in front of us has to be the priority. But I take on board. You've got a schoolmasterly tone. So what I'm going to do, if there's a bit of a block in the summer where I've got a little bit more time, I might just sit down and dig some old stuff out and have a little look and a listen.
Well, I mean, practice makes perfect, but also, as you said, the more you do something, the more comfortable you are, the more it becomes in your comfort zone rather than out of your comfort zone. I think you've certainly earned your stripes and have enough experience to be able to step into those environments without too much concern about what the voice and the body are doing. You mentioned, how do you describe yourself, as a facilitator for people's stories, for people to tell their stories, and I think storytelling is so important in delivery. Often you mentioned technical, the facts, and we're down to stats and football and all of that, but certainly from a business point of view, I find one thing we coach is that real change will happen at a feeling level, and people's personal stories, and you feeling that someone is connected to, whether it's a project, whether it's an industry, whether it's a show like Les Mis, or whether it's a particular football club or a football club's journey. The more we can really relate to that storytelling, the more effect it has on our audience. And is that something you've considered and worked at as well, the art of storytelling?
Yeah, I think so. I think I'm still learning it. I'm still trying to educate myself with, some people who are absolute masters in this field, learn about the sort of flow of stories. Obviously, some stuff I do in terms of donutting things, maybe a theme that I start an interview with, kind of we come back to at the very end. But that emotional connection is definitely true. And I think the studies were 22 times more likely to remember an emotional story than we are a fact. So, and we've all got great instances from our past that we might want to share with people of, I've been where you are, and this is how I dealt with it. Now, actually, particularly the sports industry, and particularly the football industry, that's a pretty tough nut to crack because they don't want to be regarded as being braggadocio. They don't want to be regarded that they're boasting about their past, and they almost like to put it in a little box and leave it. And I go, well, wait a minute, you've got a kid there who's struggling to do something, and you've been through that experience. Why would you not tell them how it is? Here's a good example from sport of storytelling. Marcus Rashford and the food poverty campaign that he's instigated. And right near the start of it, he said, I grew up in relative food poverty, and my mum would take us all to the supermarket on a Sunday, and she would buy us all 7 yogurts to last us a week. And if we decided to eat 2 of them on Tuesday, it meant that one day later in the week, we wouldn't have the yogurt to eat because there wasn't any money there to buy it. I mean, how long did that take me to tell? 15 seconds, 18 seconds? We've just fundamentally underpinned food poverty in the space of 15 seconds of emotional connection. I'm in that supermarket. I'm imagining mum pulling the kids along to the supermarket, maybe one of them in the pushchair, a couple of the older ones helping and things, coming back home, unloading the fridge, putting it in the fridge. And I'm looking at a hungry kid on a Tuesday, looking up at that fridge, getting their yogurt out, eating it, and then going, oh, I'm still hungry, and that was delicious, and I really fancy another. And then having that dilemma. That's the art of storytelling for me.
Yeah. I'm aware there's so much I want to talk about and so little time. I'm just
Let's
staying
do
on the
2 episodes. Let's just break it
exactly.
down. Do 2 episodes.
Have a whole series with you. Just talking about being authentic, and you were like, "That's me. That's who I am." What about when you went into the sort of the rogue traders in BBC One and confronting people who you didn't know how they were going to react? You didn't, and I'm sure you were very safe at all times with support. But was there a performance there? Was there a time where you had to put on a bit more of an act, or was that still you being you? How did that affect you from a communicating and a delivery point of view?
Well, I probably got told off a wee bit because when you do those things, it is a bit of a sting operation. So this was tracking some rogue builders as part of an overall series looking at safety around the home. And we kind of stake out, and I can remember some builder was in Scotland, Inverness or something, and he came along and the cameras were running and he's walking up the path, and then we confront. And there were times actually where I'm just wanting to kind of get stuck in, and they're encouraging you to be a bit more subjective and try not to be confrontational. I can be confrontational at times and probably got a little bit too close. And there was one tried to drive the van off, and I've got the passenger door open. I'm trying to get my foot on the footwell, and the security guys go, Mark, get down, get down, get down. You've got to let him go. You can't touch his van, etc., etc., etc. So yeah, I think
You were still authentic.
I was still authentic, yeah, but I got away with it, and that's not encouraging anybody to confront me, by the way.
I saw on I don't know whether it was X, formerly Twitter, or whether it was Instagram, and it was a picture of you at Inter Miami. And I can't remember what you wrote, but it was something like, look where I am, essentially, and the home now of David Beckham's football team and the home of Lionel Messi. And you've worked with so many, not just sporting icons, but particularly, sporting icons: David Beckham, Thierry Henry, Wayne Rooney, Sven-Goran Eriksson, Gareth Southgate. I know you've spent a lot of time with. How do you find it? How do you find that you need to build rapport with these people? And is there a moment again when you're faced with these high profile people that you really have to consider your approach?
For me, it again comes down to prep. So if I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I think, in terms of tone setting, you can't go in there jumping around like a lunatic. You've got to sort of take the lead on tone and then gradually win their faith. And that for me comes from that preparation. If I'm meeting somebody for the first time, I want to know more about them than they can remember about themselves. And then once I've perhaps won them over with a little bit of, I had an example with a footballer quite recently who I'd read their Wikipedia and their biography and stuff before I met them. And then in the conversation, 30 seconds in, and we were talking about the success that they've had and how it was earned because they'd had lots of loan moves. And I named 2 or 3 loan clubs, and I could see the light bulb moment with this individual thinking, oh, this guy actually does know that I did have to go to X and Y and Z. And it immediately wins you that bit of faith. Then if you can put a big smile on your face and be passionate about the story that you're telling, authentically tell them, compliment them on one of their successes, then the relationship starts to lift off. Most of these individuals, again, I'll take you back to what I call the cottage industry that surrounds personalities. There's a lot of people that obviously do protect them and put the framework around them to move them from A to B. But essentially, most people, I genuinely would struggle to name you too many people that you wouldn't want to spend some time with. And, if one of those names you've just mentioned was properly prepped and had the time put aside and there were no other distractions and was joining us on this podcast now, it'd just be like you and I. It'd be 3 blokes instead of 2 talking about a common bond subject. So I hope that gives a little bit of inference. Of course, preamble's also important, I think, and stuff. If we're gearing up to meet somebody, that's why small talk's so important. Making sure that, particularly if you're doing something in a public forum, you don't burn all the questions up that you want to use in the public forum. So if I'm interviewing somebody, my icebreakers do need to be, I'll share. We did it before we started recording this. We haven't spoken for a while. I was catching up on, we're both catching up on what each other have been doing. You don't want to be discussing the stuff that you're going to be doing in the actual interview, because your interviewee will think, oh, I've already discussed that. Or even worse, they'll go, as we were just discussing, and it's something that was in the preamble that you haven't even been discussing on the podcast. So small talk's important as well. Big smiles, energy, enthusiasm, giving people a nice experience.
The money that's in football now, and the money that's being ploughed into somewhere like into Miami, and we're watching Man City and Arsenal battling it out for the Premier League. You've been around a lot of these organizations and what we would say are high performing teams, but not just in sport, but also in business. And when we first met, I was talking about elite performance in theatre compared to elite performance in football. And, at that point, I just thought, this is ridiculous. There's no comparison. But actually, when I broke it down, I was able to see exactly how my industry can really help inform, and how we can relate and learn from each other. But are there any examples of high performing teams that you've gone into that you've been extremely impressed with? And also, I suppose, with that question, the leaders of those high performing teams and what their style has been.
Yeah, I think so. I can actually remember that morning when we first met, and this was a football bill. It was for football coaches, and I saw you on the bill, and the same doubts you had, I did. I'm thinking, what is this all about? And then you stood up and started to talk about, I can remember you referred to the wig master or mistress on Les Mis. And obviously, if they aren't standing in the right space at the side of the stage with the right wig for somebody that's got to do a quick costume change at the right time, the production falls down, doesn't it? And somebody can't go out there and deliver the best version of themselves. So that was a transformational moment, actually, to do that comparison. And actually, I've got pals now who are football managers who go into the kitchens in elite restaurants or go and sit through the night at A&E and watch some of those organizations as to how people cope under intense pressure. I know somebody else who did a comparison between the fine margins in elite football and the elite gun squad at the Met Police, where, of course, the equivalent of shooting a ball over a bar rather than in the goal net in football in the elite gun squad could have fatal consequences elsewhere. So you know what? I think I think those moments are all around us. Uh, I I think, I mean, lots of very senior people from also, in the last few years, I've been fortunate enough through one organization to work in Miami, what, 4 or 5 times now, a couple of times to Toronto, a couple of times to Melbourne, a couple of times to New York. Every organization has got its own characteristics, sometimes quirky ways of doing things, but there's an inherent quality at the center of it. Brighton and Hove Albion's a pretty good example. They've got an amazing chief executive called Paul Barber there. His attention to detail and the things that matter is succession planning. He's on the record of saying this. We did an event together in Miami, and he talked about him and his head of HR get together once a week, and they review the top 25 positions at the football club in terms of how secure people are in those positions. Has the person that's head of facilities suddenly received bad news about a situation which means they might have to spend time away from the club? So, you know, every organization is different. Every individual is different, but there's just an inherent commitment to quality at the heart of it, of knowing what's right or what's wrong in their eyes. Obviously, that's a judgment, isn't it? Our values and beliefs, but the things that the small things they're prepared to allow to go in return for getting a return, big picture wise.
And what about leaders? Whether they are whether you think they're great communicators or just people you've looked at, you've witnessed or interviewed that you respect greatly for the way they conduct themselves.
Well, you mentioned an absolute national figure right now, a household name in Gareth Southgate, the current England manager. I mean, again, when he looks at you, you're in his sphere. He's not distracted. A lot of us get distracted too easily. In fact, I think I spotted a trend in the last couple of years where people get distracted. I find myself, I don't talk a lot. I think I ask lots of questions and let other people talk. Well, I do find increasingly that when somebody does actually ask me a question and I get started on it, they interrupt me after 15 seconds. They'll get distracted and go off. When you're talking to someone like Gareth Southgate, he is looking at you. And despite the fact there's a queue of people waiting to talk to him, he's talking to only you. And the intense pressure there as well of just from a communication point of view too. Just bear in mind when he does a press conference, with some of the volatile situations around the world of whether we're lighting up the arch in whatever colors or there are conflicts going on, Ukraine, Russia, the whole Hamas Israel thing. He's potentially getting briefed by the Foreign Office about what the country's policy is on stuff. How challenging is that to go into a press conference where somebody might be wanting to ask you about a specific player, an incident in that player's life, perhaps an overall flow about your own contract situation. Oh, and the organization that you work for, the Football Association, has not done X or Y or Z. He spends as much time preparing for a press conference as he does for the actual football side of a game these days. Now, obviously, he's got a network of coaches work for him. That doesn't mean he's neglecting the football side. But what an impressive person. What a brilliant person in terms of dealing with previous disappointments. An obvious one, any football fans will know, missed a crucial penalty in Euro 96, constantly comes up in every interview. Respected by business leaders. If you look at some of the stuff that's available online of, with Toto Wolff from, is it VW? Mercedes, Toto Wolff from Mercedes. So he's in real demand there. He's got an insatiable quest for new knowledge, taking those fine margins out of all sorts of situations, deeply humble, time for everybody he possibly can. It's a very impressive character.
And I think you hit the nail on the head there, that it takes work to be not just a good leader, but a good communicator. And people need to evolve. They need to move with the times, and they need to develop and improve their own approach and their own skills. And I think that's something I've been fortunate enough to meet Gareth a few times as well. And when I first met him was way back when we were at the FA, and he was the under 21s manager. And even then, in the workshop that I was part of, I could see the way he was thinking and the connections he was making with our industry, and looking at himself and looking at how he needed to grow. And I've sort of witnessed that now in such a public way. I saw that. I don't know whether you've seen the play Dear England, and that was fascinating. And how much of that is, I did see Gareth, and he said, he at that point hadn't seen it himself, and I don't know whether he has yet. But how much is completely accurate, and how much has been sort of dramatized. But it does give a good indication into his philosophies, his beliefs, and how he's not afraid of change and learning and growing. And I think as a result, we've seen that within the England squad, and not necessarily, not always on the pitch, but certainly behind the scenes, the organisation has changed drastically while he has been the manager.
Yeah, and I think there's probably a little bit of reverse mentoring there as well, isn't it? We always think of mentors as being senior and young upstarts being the ones that are benefiting from it. But it is a hugely fastly changing world. I think the latest stats are, is it 50% of job types that exist today will not exist in even 5 years' time. I mean, that's a fundamental change across society. So we can be reverse mentored as well. There's a joy in sitting down and getting a perspective from Gen Z or from millennials on their window on the world and taking some guidance there. I had an example. I'd gone to shake the hands, just this as an example of learning and being inquisitive. A few years ago, I went to shake the hands of a Muslim lady. No, I went to give her a hug. I went to give a Muslim lady a hug. Somebody I knew quite well, and she went, "Oh no, Mark, please, just a handshake." So I shook her hand and learned a lesson from that as to how I should deal with that situation. And then last year I was in Toronto, and there was a lady with the hijab on and her arms all covered and stuff. And so this is so-and-so, and I went to shake her hand. And she said, "Oh no, if you don't mind, we'll just elbow bump." And her elbows were completely covered. And so I responded, went away. And then a little bit later on, there was just 2 or 3 people around and said, "Would you mind just educating me as to, this is what's happened to me previously?" And that's what I took as a marker. And she just explained that it's a thing of personal choice and beliefs. And so it's just made me more adaptable to, in that situation, let that individual take the lead, or what I could do to show hand on heart, to show genuine interest, and to try and live life by the ideals that are important to them. It's just a little example of how we can be inquisitive, and that again tests our communication skills, Chris, doesn't it?
It does.
That takes a little bit of bottle to do that, and step outside your comfort zone and say, actually, I don't understand. Because often we might be in a scenario where we're feeling king of the castle, and then to admit a little bit of vulnerability, and I don't know how this situation works, and to learn. But it's such a joy to add that stuff to your mix,
We're running out of time, sadly, but you mentioned your top one of your tips earlier. I don't know if you had any others there that you want to share with us, whether it's about the communication skills, how people can develop them, or what you've learned about from certain role models about communication. Anything you want to give us, little tidbits from you?
I think there's 2 more things I'd like to share here. One is that when we think of life-changing moments, we tend to think of them as being sort of crushing ones, that the loss of a relative or something goes badly wrong. But actually, over the course of a life, there'll be several very happy accidents where you're in the right place at the right time. I've certainly had one with one particular client that I work with, who have taken me all over the world and just happened to spot me at a big awards ceremony, sitting as a member of the audience. An individual from them happened to see the back of my head, and I just looked at and send somebody over to say, "Oh, would you come and have a chat?" There's a more direct version of this story, but we're running out of time. And I just happened to be right place at the right time, and it's opened up this whole world for me. If I hadn't gone to that awards ceremony that night, or if the organizers had placed me 2 tables down, the individual that spotted me might not have spotted me. And everything that's happened to me over the last few years would not have happened. But you have to be ready for those. So, I know, I know I've read stories of actors who have the faith that the big role is going to come, and so they're practicing their techniques. They're tucked away in their bedrooms and stuff. So life will bring some very happy accidents, but try and be ready for them. That is number one, and that certainly applies to public speaking. Put the hard yards in now, so that if you do find yourself going for a job interview where you've got to present for 15 minutes to your potential employers, you've not got all that anxiety of not being a very good public speaker. That is why it's so important. So certainly be ready for happy accidents, be prepared for them. And the other one is, is something I heard on Chris Evans' breakfast show back in his Radio 2 days. He had Chris Martin from Coldplay in, and he said, how do you keep coming up with these enormous hits? And, love them or hate them, Coldplay around the world, these anthems play, and half a city or town seems to know what they are. And Chris Martin said, we just try really hard. And it's been a mantra that's sort of governed me ever since. There are times for all of us when we can knock off early, go and do stuff. When I'm finished here now, I've had a bit of an intensive period of work. I'd like to do some little relaxing bits of admin. There's all sorts of stuff around me. It would really cheer me up. But you know what? I've got a couple of mega big things, a couple of which are going to be a bit stretching. And I know I've got to discipline myself, but I don't want to feel that long-term pain. So we all have a choice every day when we get out of bed, don't we? Are we going to apply ourselves? Are we going to push ourselves? And that applies to communication scenarios. Maybe you're networking. Maybe it's easier to stay within the people you already know in the room. But, if we push ourselves, we try really hard, we go to the far corner of the room where there's a cluster of people you don't know, and we find a way of forcing ourselves into that circle. Who knows where it's going to lead and where your life could be a little bit further down the line.
It's great advice. You mentioned mindfulness earlier. I've recently started ice baths, which is something I never thought I would do, but just as a prep for the beginning of the day, dunking myself in anything from sort of 7 to 12 degrees. Well, actually not bad. I'm the sort of person who I can't switch off. I can't switch my brain off. I always find, and mindfulness with an app, even though you're listening to it and they're saying, if you start to drift away, come back. I'm going, well, yeah, I'm completely drifting away. Whereas I find with the ice bath, in that moment, I just have to focus on that. I have to focus on my breath, on my breathing, and control myself for that 3 to 5 minutes, whatever it is I choose to do. And it really sets me up for the right way in the day, and then to be prepared for anything that might come my way.
Is it addictive?
Well, I think for me it is, yeah. Yeah, I really like when I go to the beach with my wife. She'll jump in the sea, whatever the weather is, and I'll be like, no, thank you, no, too cold, can't be bothered. But actually, it's once you get out and you're feeling the sort of chill through your veins in a positive way. I've just obtained a chiller now that will keep it at the certain temperature that I want it at, because otherwise Aldi are almost out of ice. Other supermarkets are available, I should say.
Wow, I've tried the cold shower thing, the whole Wim Hof thing. I've tried that. But I'm a little bit older than you, and I'm worried if I go plunging into too many ice baths, it might give me a heart attack or something.
Well, the thing with the shower is that it's constantly moving, so it's constantly hit. So you keep feeling it. Whereas if you plunge in, you're in, and then you've just got to control it. But anyway, we digress. So you've mentioned your energy management and choosing now moving forward what it is you want to do, and what is that? What can we look out for the next decade of Clem?
Well, listen. I suppose I've never been in a 9-to-5 existence. I love having an array of stuff. I've definitely got a portfolio career. I hope there'll be some broadcast that continues in there, because that's particularly the films I make for a program called Football Focus, BBC One Saturday lunchtime, are a real joy. Maybe there'll be a new podcast that's going to come up as part of that mix. That's nothing planned yet, but there's a few things bubbling around. But I love face-to-face events. There's nothing I love more than going into a room of 200-300 people and facilitating a complex conference for them. I do mental health, I do EDI, I do sports ground safety, I do betting integrity, I do leadership, teamship, just helping shape a day, do that kind of stuff, do award ceremonies, do big sort of theatre events with maybe quite famous names, and again, helping them tell a story. So I hope a lot more of that. And I hope a lot more of the coaching. I do. There is an inherent joy in getting somebody, like doing one-to-one, getting people in the room, they shut the door and they sort of admit their vulnerabilities and just seeing the journey. Or if I'm spending a week with a group of people, maybe over the course of an overseas summit, public speaking is very much part of it. And I can see people move over the course of the week from being reluctant to even say their name when we do a little sort of informal register at 9 o'clock on a Monday morning, to standing in front of a group of heavy hitters from the organization who are hosting us and presenting a case study by Friday afternoon. So there's an inherent joy in that. And I hope there'll be a bit more of that. And I hope you and I will lock horns at some point as
I'm
well.
sure we will. I'm sure we will.
Rather than virtually.
I'm sure. I'm just very quickly. I'm sure I know the answer, but you just mentioned such a diverse range that we haven't had time to sort of discuss of the sort of events and subject matter that you deal with. Do you find that your approach is always you? It's in your preparation, but your delivery is pretty much the same because that authenticity works for you? Or do you find that with you spoke about you've gone from sort of sports to mental health to diversity and inclusion. Do you really have to think, okay, I need to approach this in a different way in my manner, in my delivery?
Yeah, of course. You've got, but that comes into the client briefing. But at the end of the day, don't forget, I'm the glue. I can say to somebody, you're hiring me for this event. Do you want it brought in on time? Yes, of course we do. If they come to me and say, we're supposed to start at 10, actually, we're not going to start till past. No problem at all. Where are you going to get that time back from? Oh, and we hadn't thought about that. Well, I can't stretch time. So I'm the glue that holds it together. Of course, I'll respect the tone of it and the subject matter of it, but I'm not the expert in that scenario. I'm just the person that listen inquisitively, make sure I've been thoroughly briefed, and just coax people along to tell the best version of the story that they've got.
Clem, thank you very much indeed. If anybody wants to get in touch with you, get hold of you, where's the best place to find you?
Oh, I'm not hard to find. I'm on LinkedIn. Just search for Mark Clemmit, MarkClemmit. Connect with me on there and we can direct message, or you can find my website, which is just my name, Mark Clemmit, MarkClemmit.com. Been a pleasure.
Pleasure, as always. Thanks so much, Clem.
Cheers.